My HOA fined me for trying to save the bees. They called my wildflowers weeds and demanded a perfectly sterile green lawn. So I gave them a lawn that followed their rules perfectly. A lawn so ugly, so chaotic, it became a monument to their own stupidity. This isn't just a story about gardening. It's the story of how I destroyed my own lawn to win a war. Moving into my new house in the Harmony Hills subdivision felt like a dream. The air was clean, the streets were quiet, and I finally had a patch of green earth to call my own. As someone who cares about the environment, I wanted my little patch to do some good. I'd been reading a lot about the decline of bee populations, and the solution seemed simple: plant native wildflowers. So I dedicated a small, sunny corner of my front lawn to a pollinator garden. I tilled the soil, planted a mix of colorful coneflowers, black-eyed Susans, and milkweed. Within a few weeks, it was a beautiful, buzzing hub of life. Butterflies and bees danced among the petals. It was my favorite part of the house. Unfortunately, it was not Brenda's favorite part. Brenda was the self-appointed general of the Harmony Hills HOA. A woman in her late 60s, she patrolled the neighborhood daily in her golf cart, armed with a clipboard and a look of perpetual disapproval. She had a reputation for measuring grass height with a ruler and issuing violations for inconsistently colored mulch. One afternoon, she rolled to a stop in front of my house. Her eyes, magnified by her thick glasses, zeroed in on my wildflower patch. "That's a lovely little collection of weeds you have there, dear," she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "You do know the community bylaws require a uniform manicured lawn, don't you? You'll want to take care of that before it gets out of hand." She smiled, but it was the smile of a predator. I politely explained that they were wildflowers for the bees. She just chuckled. "We're not trying to attract insects here, dear. We're trying to maintain property values." With that, she drove off, leaving me with a sinking feeling in my stomach. I thought that was the end of it. I was so wrong. I'm so glad you're here to see how this all unfolds. It's wild how a simple good deed can get you into so much trouble. I'd love to know. What's the one thing you've done that you were proud of, but someone else just didn't understand? Let me know in the comments below. And if this story is already getting under your skin, hitting that like button and subscribing really helps me fight the good fight and share these stories. It truly makes a difference. A week later, the official declaration of war arrived in my mailbox. A crisp envelope with the HOA logo. Inside was a formal violation notice. Your property has been cited for failure to maintain a uniform lawn, specifically the cultivation of unapproved flora, weeds, in the front yard. It was accompanied by a grainy, zoomed-in photo of my beautiful wildflowers. The notice gave me 14 days to rectify the issue or face a fine. The word weeds was circled in red ink. Brenda wasn't just giving a warning. She was making a statement. She was telling me that in her kingdom, nature was not welcome. Only perfect, sterile, green conformity would be tolerated. I wasn't going to rip out my garden without a fight. I prepared for the next HOA meeting like I was preparing for a legal battle. I printed out articles from environmental websites about the importance of pollinators. I brought photos of my garden showing the bees and butterflies happily buzzing around. I was armed with logic, reason, and a genuine desire to do good. I was walking into a gunfight with a bouquet of flowers. The meeting room was cold and unwelcoming. Brenda sat at the head of the table, looking bored as I presented my case. I explained the ecological benefits. I talked about how a small patch of native plants could support an entire local ecosystem. I even suggested that pollinator-friendly yards could be a positive selling point for the community. I finished my presentation and looked at her, expecting at least a thoughtful consideration. Instead, she sighed dramatically, as if I had just wasted 10 minutes of her precious time. "That's all very noble, Mr. Nawab," she said, drawing out the word noble as if it were an insult. "But what you fail to understand is that Harmony Hills is not a nature preserve. It's a planned community with high standards. Your wildflowers look messy. They look like weeds, and they send a message to potential buyers that we are not diligent in our upkeep." I was floored. "But they're not weeds. They're beneficial plants." She cut me off with a sharp wave of her hand. "To you, perhaps. To the bylaws, any plant in a lawn that isn't pre-approved uniform turf grass is a weed. End of story." She then turned to the rest of the board. The violation stands. Mr. Nawab, you have 1 week to clear out that patch and resod it with approved fescue grass, or the $200 fine will be levied, with an additional $50 per day thereafter. My jaw dropped. $50 a day? For a few flowers? She gave me a cold, triumphant smile. The rules are the rules. We don't need bees here, Mr. Nawab. We need conformity. The room was silent. No one defended me. They all just stared at their notes, too afraid to cross the queen. I walked out of that room, my face burning with humiliation and rage. She hadn't just rejected my idea, she had mocked my values. She wanted a perfect, uniform lawn. Fine. I would give her a lawn that was perfectly uniform, and one that would become her living nightmare. For the next 2 days, I was consumed by a cold fury. Every time I looked at my beautiful, buzzing garden, all I could see was Brenda's smug face. I thought about just paying the fine and ripping it all out. It would be easier. But every time I considered surrender, I heard her voice in my head. We don't need bees. We need conformity. That line lit a fire in me. This was no longer about flowers. This was about principle. She wanted to use her rule book as a weapon to crush me, so I decided to turn that weapon back on her. I retrieved the monstrous 3-ring binder, the HOA covenants and restrictions, from a dusty box in my garage. It was even thicker than I remembered. With a pot of black coffee and a grim determination, I started reading. Page after page of mind-numbing rules about fence heights, satellite dish placement, and the approved number of holiday lights per square foot. My eyes glazed over, but I forced myself to continue, searching for anything related to landscaping. I found the section on lawns. It was incredibly specific. It listed 3 approved types of fescue grass. It dictated maximum grass height, 4 inches, and mandated a weekly watering schedule. It was a tyrant's dream. But then I kept scrolling. I found a subsection I had overlooked before. It was titled, Alternative Landscaping and Water Conservation. My heart started beating faster. It was a section added in the early 2000s to encourage drought-resistant yards. It outlined the rules for grass-free xeriscaping. My eyes scanned the text, and then I saw the magic words. Xeriscaping may include, but is not limited to, drought-tolerant plants, mulch beds, and decorative rock gardens. I read the sentence again. And again, rock gardens were explicitly allowed. I frantically searched for any restrictions on the type, size, or color of the rocks. There were none. The rules simply stated, decorative rock. The original authors probably imagined a tasteful Zen garden or some nice river stones. They never could have imagined what my vengeful mind was about to conjure. A slow, wicked grin spread across my face. I wasn't just going to get rid of my lawn. I was going to replace it with something so hideous, so unnatural, so completely against Brenda's perfect green aesthetic that it would be an insult to her very soul. And the best part? It would be 100% compliant with the HOA's own rules. I opened my laptop and typed in a search that no sane homeowner has ever typed before. Bulk, multicolored, novelty aquarium gravel. The results were glorious. Bright blues, shocking purples, neon greens, and sparkly oranges. My plan was set. Brenda wanted conformity. I would give her a garden that conformed to the rules so perfectly it would make her eyes bleed. The following Saturday was D-Day, or more accurately, G-Day for gravel. At 9 a.m., a massive dump truck rumbled down my quiet street and backed into my driveway. The noise brought the neighbors out of their houses. Brenda was already on her porch, sipping tea, a smug look on her face. She must have assumed it was a landscaping crew coming to rip out my flowers and lay down new, compliant sod. She was in for a surprise. I had spent the morning with a sod cutter, slicing up my entire front lawn. The beautiful green grass, the part I was allowed to keep, was rolled up and carted away. All that remained was a bare, ugly patch of dirt. Brenda watched this with immense satisfaction, nodding her approval. Then the dump truck began to lift its bed. With a deafening roar, a waterfall of color cascaded onto my driveway. It wasn't soil. It wasn't mulch. It was a mountain of the most obnoxiously bright, multicolored aquarium gravel you have ever seen. There were neon pinks, electric blues, lime greens, and sparkly purples all mixed together. It looked like a unicorn had thrown up on my property. I looked across the street. Brenda had frozen mid-sip, her teacup hovering in the air. Her smug expression melted into one of utter, slack-jawed disbelief. The entire neighborhood fell silent. For the rest of the day, I worked with a wheelbarrow and a rake, spreading the chaotic, colorful gravel over every square inch of what used to be my lawn. I created little swirling patterns of blue and green. I made a mound of purple rocks in the center. It was a masterpiece of malicious ugliness, a suburban nightmare, a clown's rock garden. My neighbors watched in a state of horrified fascination. A few kids pointed and laughed. Their parents quickly shushed them and pulled them inside, as if my bad taste was contagious. By late afternoon, the job was done. My front yard was a psychedelic wasteland of plastic-looking rocks. It was loud, it was tacky, and it was glorious. I stood back, leaning on my rake, covered in dust and sweat, and admired my handiwork. It was the most beautiful, hideous thing I had ever seen. And I knew across the street my nemesis was having a complete and total meltdown. The war wasn't over, but I had just won the most spectacular battle. It took less than 5 minutes. I had barely put my tools away when Brenda came storming across the street. Her face, which was usually a pale white, was now a shade of blotchy, furious red that almost matched some of the gravel. What is this?" she sputtered, gesturing wildly at my Technicolor lawn. "This is an abomination. This is a disgrace to the entire community. You have turned your yard into a circus." I had been waiting for this moment. I gave her my calmest, most pleasant smile. "Why, Brenda, I'm just following the rules," I said cheerfully. "Rules?" she shrieked. "There is no rule that allows for this." "On the contrary," I said, pulling a neatly printed copy of the alternative landscaping bylaw from my back pocket. I held it up for her. Section 9, subsection C, grass-free xeriscaping, including decorative rock gardens. I'm just doing my part for water conservation. It's all right here in your rule book. She snatched the paper from my hand and her eyes scanned it frantically. I watched as the horrifying realization dawned on her. I saw the exact moment her brain processed the fact that I was right. The rule existed, and it had no restrictions on the color, size, or type of rock. She was trapped. Her own weapon, the sacred rule book, had been used to create the very thing she hated most, something that wasn't uniform, green, and boring. She looked from the paper to my smirking face, to the chaotic clown garden and back again. She opened her mouth to say something, but no words came out. She was utterly, completely defeated. She crumpled the paper in her fist, let out a sound that was half scream, half groan, and stomped back to her house. The victory was sweeter than I could have ever imagined. My colorful gravel garden became a local legend. People would slow down their cars to stare. Some loved it, some hated it, but everyone knew the story behind it. And every single day, Brenda had to wake up and look out her window at my masterpiece of malicious compliance. It was a permanent, sparkling Technicolor reminder of her defeat. But I knew a woman like Brenda wouldn't stay down for long. A week later, a notice was posted on every door in the neighborhood. Brenda had called an emergency bylaw amendment meeting. The topic on the agenda? To define the term decorative rock and to restrict the color palette of all approved landscaping materials. She had lost the battle, but she was changing the rules of the war. My clown garden was now under threat. And if you want to find out how I prepared for that meeting and what new loophole I found to protect my beautiful, ugly lawn, make sure you subscribe for part 2. The fight was just getting started.